Hey, I'm LaVeist. He's Derrick ClaVille. You tune into LaVeist and ClaVille. We give it to you straight the way it is from a black male's perspective. Today's show, part two, justice for George Floyd. This week, again, in the second week of the trial, has been more emotional, riveting testimony, powerful testimony from witnesses, also law enforcement and medical experts. One of the training officers, Johnny Murcell, I believe his name is, actually testified that George Floyd continuing to have his knee on the neck, Derrick Chauvin, I'm sorry, continuing to have his knee on the neck of George Floyd was absolutely unauthorized. Eric, as attorney, man, I mean, what do you think of how the prosecution, the direction that they go in the case that they're building so far? What's your thoughts?
Well, again, this is definitely, I believe, and you and I spoke about this. This is the trial of not just a decade, but really this century as we look at policing in Black America. From an attorney's perspective, I think that the prosecution is doing a phenomenal job ensuring that they bring individuals who are experienced, that know the process, that know the policies and the like. They brought the police chiefs, they brought the training officers, they brought individuals who know the policy, responsible for training and the like. And all of them have agreed that in no way was the actions by former officer who's on trial for murder, Derrick Chauvin, were in line with policy, even when you're given that leeway, right? Because look, let's keep in mind, being a police officer, more than likely you're coming 9 times out of 10 into a situation that is high adrenaline running. It's a situation that's chaotic. It's a situation where you got 2 people or multiple people don't agree, right? So, so we're still acknowledging that you don't call the police just to say, hey, have a coffee and a donut with me. I just wanted to say hello.
Yeah, I mean, because their training is about coming into situations like that and being able to de-escalate. So they're not like a regular citizen like you or I coming into a situation, high stress, don't have the training of being able to come into the situation and resolve it and cool it down. That's what we expect and we call them, and they're trained to do it. And all of the testimony so far is saying that Derrick Chauvin failed miserably.
Absolutely.
All of that.
Absolutely. And also keep in mind, as a former soldier myself, even in war, we were trained that when you go in, there are certain things that you cannot do. Right. So you even have to de-escalate in a situation of wartime where you have bombs, you have bullets, you have persons dying all around you, and you're attacking the enemy, but still there are certain things that you can and cannot do. So in this situation, they showed where, and we didn't even see this part on the camera, but they even showed where he was using a pain technique where it's a pain submission. So not only was his knee in the neck of George Floyd cutting off his airflow, you also had the former officer Derrick Chauvin, twisting or putting his finger into his palm, causing pain and tightening the handcuffs.
So essentially, he was torturing him at this point. I mean, again, police are supposed to come into a situation. They're supposed to gain control of the situation. And like some of the testimony that came forth was, once the situation is controlled, once a person is cuffed, then it's the job of the police officer to de-escalate and actually treat the suspect as if the person is in your care. Again, this is not the same as a typical citizen. You think, I got somebody under control and I'm just trying to keep them under control. I'm not worried about the fact that they are in my care. But as a police officer, you're arrested, you're in the care of the police officer. So when you say he was actually applying pain to this man who is cuffed and can't resist at this manner, and there's more than one officer, he was now in the mode of he's inflicting torture. He's like, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I mean, and this goes to the core of how in the Black community and Black and brown communities, how we often feel that we are being policed. It's not that we're being treated as if we're in the care of officers and that a situation is being de-escalated. But
Absolutely.
there's this extra element of I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm going to be judge and jury here on the street. I'm going to teach you a lesson. Right? I mean, it goes to the core of the case.
Absolutely. And Will, you're exactly right. Because now, you are now have the responsibility, meaning the officer, in order to not just de-escalate, but treat that person as with respect and with care so that you don't harm them any further or cause them to harm anyone. And everyone saw. I mean, your eyes can't lie to you, Will. George Floyd was no threat to anybody. As a matter of fact, he was pleading to please let him up. He was begging that he was dying. He was begging for his mother. He was saying, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. At this point, and also in the body cam, you saw the other officers that were on him initially. They even got up and then went to Derrick Chauvin and said, maybe we should let him up. And he said, no, we're going to keep him here in this position. Now, keep in mind, when you're looking at Derrick Chauvin, and I go back and I look at his face. How cavalier he was, how he was kind of thumbing his nose up at everyone else. Now, if George Floyd was such a big threat, then why is your hand in your pocket and the other is on your thigh?
Right. I mean, it goes to, again, hand in pocket, putting even more pressure, more weight, because he's not bracing himself with his hands on the ground, on hands on the car. So it kind of shows this extra, I'm going to teach you a lesson. How dare you resist me? How dare you not submit to me? How dare you question my authority over you? And these are the things I think people have to realize and understand. And I think that this whole case is really bringing to the fore that policing in the Black community, Black and Brown communities, is not often felt that it's about protecting and serving and care. It's about teaching a lesson. It's about maintaining control. It's about keeping you down. And in this case, we see Chauvin literally keeping George Floyd down to the point of sucking the life out of him. And one of the things that came out in the testimony is that Chauvin was regularly trained on doing CPR, regularly trained. Again, from an officer's perspective, once the situation is under control, now you are supposed to be administering care, not administering a lesson, not administering, I'm going to teach you, how to submit,
Right.
But you're supposed to be administering care at this point, because your goal is you arrested the person because you think that they're allegedly committed a crime. So your job is to build a case against them to properly administer them and have them receive justice or due process for the crime. So it's just interesting the way that this is playing out, and you're seeing this extra angle here of dehumanizing people, which is at the core of what Black and Brown people have been complaining about when it comes to policing in the communities, for generations.
Absolutely. And then even outside this trial, we talked about initially how this particular trial has sparked a reckoning with social justice, and more specifically, as it relates to the treatment of Black people by the white establishment and what we call systematic racism. And we've seen this happen for the last 10 months, almost 12 months now, across the world, not just the United States. But also what I saw, and we all saw it, was that white America finally said, oh my God, this is exactly what they've been talking about. So when people say that I didn't know that I had white privilege, or I didn't know that Blacks were being treated this way, I think that sometimes persons can hide their head in the sand and not see what they really don't want to see or have to see, and try to deny it. What George Floyd did, his life wasn't in vain. It basically showed the world exactly what Black people have been going through. So the knee on the neck of George Floyd was not just the knee that took his life, it was also symbolism of the knee on the necks of Black peoples across the country and the world, struggling, trying to get ahead, being mistaken for quote unquote an individual who's causing trouble and actually is really a law-abiding citizen, a person who's falsely accused, a person who is being discriminated against, a person where prejudice is now hampering them being able to move forward, a person who's Black, who's trying to break strides into a traditional white structure, but being pushed back all the time. So that's what I believe this trial has shown us, and what George Floyd has shown us. And George Floyd is, within our age group, right? I mean, he was 46.
Right.
So we all have lived what he lived.
Right. And that's the but. We talked about this but Rodney King. Okay. But Eric Garner. I mean, I share your optimism and your hope that this case is really
it is hope.
But Rodney King, but Eric Garner. I mean, again, with the Rodney King case, we talked about it in the last show. We saw the video. We thought, okay, this is it. But Eric Garner in New York, we saw the video of the officers having him in a stranglehold and holding him down. And we thought, okay, this is it. Clearly, this is over the line. Or clearly, people are going to realize now. And again, here we are. We see the video. Mr. Floyd, George Floyd, life sucked out of him. And we got to remember, but these other cases also came before us, and there wasn't the justice. It wasn't the level of justice. And so this is one of the things that is just really concerning for me. Again, you talked about your experience in the military, and my experience as a reporter covering police, and then also being in an area, Hampton Roads, where you're at, strong military area, and talking to many military families. It's the police families and military that are among the first people who will tell you about the responsibility of handling people in situations like that.
Right.
And like this, they are the ones who know, and they are the ones who oftentimes are most disturbed when they see things like this, because of how it strikes to the heart of their training. It strikes to the heart of why they even got into the profession, to protect and serve in the first place. So I think that one of the things that concerns me about this is how a lot of people have become totally anti-police over this. And specifically, when you look at a lot of the Black police officers, men and women who are out there, who got into the force to make a change. And again, I can tell you, as a reporter dealing with cops of many different backgrounds, the majority of the police officers out there truly believe in protecting and serving. And
Absolutely.
The majority of them that are in Black and brown communities believe in protecting and serving with respect. But a lot of times it's the culture and it's the incentives that they have in place for arresting and policing and doing it in this style that leads to situations like these, where it's the bad apples, and there are many bad apples in these police forces, where the bad apples feel empowered and emboldened to engage in this kind of behavior. And I think that another piece is happening as you see experts in law enforcement coming forward and saying, no, this is not appropriate behavior. I think that that's one of the key things that's coming out of this trial as well. The blue wall coming down somewhat, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Will, because I've never seen the blue wall shaken or come down. Now, maybe it's opened the door to allow one bad apple out, and it'll close back again. The ranks will be closed. Maybe we'll see that. But for this specific case, the blue wall itself has come down. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing, because it shows that accountability. And that's one issue that we've had with policing, whether you're African American, whether you're Hispanic, Black or brown, or you're a white citizen that's been done wrong. Police are seen to be above the law, hands down. That the internal investigations has been seen to be in cahoots with policing and so forth. We've seen many cases, especially in New York, during the stop and frisk cases during that particular time in the early and mid 2000s, where individuals who were a part of that that were high ranking, the captains, the commanders, and so forth, those individuals were not disciplined; they were actually promoted.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we've seen the lack of accountability. So I think this is really good for person's trust in police and people's trust in the policing system. So I think this is a good thing. But I also want to point out how this is also a good thing to not how we used to demonize individuals who were struggling with drug use. And one thing that this case has shown, and this is one of the defenses for former Officer Derrick Chauvin, that
of course,
it wasn't my knee on his neck for
not attack the victim, of course.
Right. It was his drug use that actually killed him. I mean, I didn't have to be there. In 9.5 minutes, even if I wasn't there, he's going to die anyway, right?
Right. If he wasn't on drugs, all of this never would have happened.
Never would have happened.
I never would have had to put my knee on his neck.
But what this trial is doing is showing that these are people who are in a life struggle, with their addictions. There are people who are operating every day. I mean, if you looked at his girlfriend or fiance who was on the stand, you would have no idea that she was an active drug user, and struggling with that life. Because again,
a lot of people are functional. Yeah, like you said, a lot of people are functional, or they don't fit the box that we typically put, a drug user under, what you see in the media, drug user, drug addict in it. People don't always fit in these neat boxes. And there's a lot of people, our neighbors, our family members, obviously, our co-workers who are struggling seriously with drugs and can easily find themselves in this kind of situation.
Whether it be, what we call over-the-counter drugs or whether it be prescription drugs. We also saw this play out in majority white society with the prescription opioid abuse. Right. So now I think there's more sympathy for people who are struggling every day with this addiction. And, hopefully there'll be more policy that comes down, more help for people, more PSAs for individuals not to find alternatives to deal with their hurt, with their pain, with their struggles, with their depression, with their mental health, so they won't have to get on these drugs. But nevertheless, I think that it was a good thing that we do show this, in trial, and, unfortunately, the defense is going to try to spin it. They're going to try to spin it and say that it was his drug use. But I think that what this trial has done is given humanity and not humiliation to people who are struggling and addicting. And some win, some do not. But ultimately, they need support as well. And
go ahead, finish your thing.
No, I was just going to say they do need support, but we have to ensure that this just isn't a fleeting moment, but rather that this becomes a standard where we humanize people and not humiliate them in everyday life.
Well, that's the challenge that I have. The cautious optimistic hope is that we've still had cases like these before, where we thought that there would be more empathy, there would be more understanding, there would actually be change. Because you're right, police officers are not equipped and often trained to deal with these kinds of issues, these kinds of drug related issues or social issues. And so they come upon situations like this, not trained for it, and throw everybody into the same box, everybody into the same group. And again, especially when it comes to Black and brown communities, it becomes so easy to just dehumanize. You're already indoctrinated into not believing that these folks are human beings worthy of respect, worthy of mutuality, of human dignity. So it becomes real easy. And then again, think and understand that police officers are emboldened legally, are the only people who have the ability to just take away your freedom. The president of the United States can't even take away your freedom. The least police officer by law, because we are a nation of laws and having to get a situation under control, has the right to take away your freedom. And so when we give people these types of authority, we've got to make sure that they are trained, that they are equipped, that they had the right mindset to be able to treat all citizens with respect. So you look at, for example, Eric Garner, the parallel between Eric Garner's case in Staten Island, New York, and George Floyd. What were they initially being stopped about? Eric Garner's being stopped about selling
Loose
cigarettes, maybe allegedly illegally selling loose cigarettes. Eric Garner's being stopped about allegedly passing on an illegal, a counterfeit $20 bill.
George Floyd.
I mean, I'm sorry. Yes, thanks. George Floyd. Please. So for these alleged crimes, these men need to lose their lives?
Yeah.
I mean, what are we talking about? And police are getting overly involved in these types of crimes as if police don't have better things to be more concerned about. So it makes you wonder, I mean, where is this coming from? What is this mindset that's going on that a police officer, that a situation is about a counterfeit bill or selling loose cigarettes ends up in the death of a human being under the care of police officers that are supposed to be trained to de-escalate situations. So it just kind of speaks to this lack of being equipped with how to manage and how to be able to deal with these types of situations. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say it also deals with the perception of Black men, right? Mm-hmm. So, keep in mind, in the trial, it also showed where former Officer Chauvin interaction with an elderly Black man on the sidewalk that said, "You killed that man." And he said, "Oh, he was probably on something. I had to handle it." And this is something where you see where also in Eric Garner case, you have 6 officers that are surrounding this quote unquote Black man.
Yeah, we had to handle him. He was,
we had to handle him. You see someone, an officer sneaking from behind and put him in a chokehold, and they take him down, and his hands are up the whole time saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe." Now, you got to ask yourself, both George Floyd and Eric Garner uttered the same words before they died. "I can't breathe." What was it about George Floyd that we saw that we did not see with Eric Garner? I ponder that thought, and I in my memory, I look at those 2 images. But at the same time, we have to look at the time period in which that took place. The time period in which this took place, Eric Garner, I believe President Obama was president. Maybe there was a backlash for African-American upward mobility and reaching points of success. Of course, we also had the Trayvon Martin case that happened during that time period, Michael Brown. And maybe we had a situation where it was more about tampering down racial unrest as opposed to really dealing with it the way that it should. During this time period, we had 4 years of Donald Trump that was chaotic. I mean, keep in mind, anything during that time period went. If it could go, it did. So I think America was more apt to protest, more apt to speak out against injustices, because we saw injustices every single day from the highest office in the land, from white actors, from the Unite the Right here in Charlottesville, to attempted kidnapping of elected officials by individuals in various states. Michigan, they wanted to do kidnapping in Virginia and other places. I think that the time period said, you know what, we can't take any more of this. And I think that was the galvanizing effect, which helped to bring this issue to the forefront. So I guess it goes to timing is everything.
Well, I don't know. I see what you're saying about the time period, but I also think that, again, these incidences keep coming up in each decade. I mean, I remember Amadou Diallo, I believe that was in the 80s or 90s in New York, when I was in New York, and he's being, sodomized by police officers. I mean, and it was a major case, and it was a major uproar. There was a major level of protest. Al Sharpton and other activists were very deeply involved in getting, justice for that family. So I just think that this is just a systemic problem, issue in America. And that I think that the issue of timing, you're correct, has been important here, because the kind of eruption that happened over the summer with blacks and whites and brown people and people of all backgrounds, and then spreading across the globe, has raised this consciousness of this issue of dehumanizing Black people, period, is a worldwide global problem. And I think that, so to that extent I think timing is very important, but I think that we've got to remember that these incidences, these tragedies have continued to happen decade after decade, after decade. And there has to be something done about the culture of policing, because I think that is much of where these particular confrontations that happen with police are coming from. The culture, and we've talked about this on previous shows, of how even policing began, from the slave the slave patrols,
yep.
Coming up through the current generation, coming through the LA, and the recruitment of whites from the South to come to LA to keep these Black and brown communities in place, and then that kind of policing method being nationalized, as well as you can pick other major centers, New York, Chicago, where that kind of policing has been part of the history of these cities from the very beginning. And I think that this type of behavior in our culture, as we're becoming more of a multicultural in terms of percentages of Black and brown people, and it's not going to serve our culture and our country well going forward anymore. We can't continue to thrive as a nation if only certain people in this country, who are not white, we continue to have these caste systems where, only white lives matter and are highly valued. Black lives don't matter. Indigenous people lives don't matter. We can't continue to thrive as a nation with this caste system that does not serve us well. And my hope is that it's through these kinds of trials, these kinds of situations, that the change will come that will help us lead towards being a better nation.
Absolutely. And Will, I love your optimism. I think it's going to be a struggle with that.
Oh, you love my optimism now.
I still see that as being a standard that's going to be fought against, because when you live with a certain standard for almost a millennium, we're not talking about a few weeks, a few days, a few months, a few years. We're talking about almost 1,000 years. This has been the standard. So it's not going to go away overnight. You're not going to pass a piece of public policy and it happens. But I think it begins with education. You mentioned Native people. What European colonialism did to the world. And I started to look at this, and I haven't seen any research written on it, but I think it should be, how European colonialism really changed the world. Keep in mind, European colonialism touched every single country except mainland China. It basically ravaged, destroyed Native peoples. European nations took over countries, lands, and still to this day, when we talk about the passing of Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth II, his lands and inheritance goes back to 1399. Because he was in line to be Prince of Greece and also Denmark because of his father. So royalty married royalty, but their lands went all the way back, almost 800 years. So somebody's going to get that. But how did it happen, right? So, I believe that this is something that's going to happen. It starts with education. And you mentioned, you forgot to mention one of the most important figures in modern day policing, and that's August Vollmer. From New Orleans, born in 1876, first police chief of Berkeley, California, died in 1955 in Berkeley, California. He actually wrote the book on modern policing and really helped to create the field of criminal justice. And in that will, he stated, he found in his different tests that you could, against people who were poor, people who were not white, people who were immigrants, and people who didn't have access, you can go harder on them in interrogation and pretty much skate the rules a bit to get the job accomplished. But you couldn't do that with individuals who were white in society and also had access and basically had resources. So even in this particular creation of criminal justice and policing, in our academies, which was taught for years. August Vollmer is a figure in criminal justice. That's where, we start that when we create these police departments. But it begins with education.
So when you think about what we need to do, we need to connect the dots between, the racism, the policies, and then how it plays out in very specific cases.
Absolutely.
Like what we've seen happen with George Floyd, that they're not things that are just divorced from each other, right, or something that just happened so many years ago. It's not relevant now, but it's all part of systemic racism and how Absolutely. We've gotten to where we are now. So as you wrap up, take us home. Take us home, Eric.
Yeah. So again, we're covering this justice for George Floyd. We're going to continue talking about this issue as the trial continues. So we'll be back again in the next segment talking about this issue and following every bit of it. Thank you again for listening to LaVeist and ClaVille. Follow us on our social media, like and share on Facebook, of course, our YouTube channel. And to us, that's the way it is. We'll see you next time.